Okay, so we're just about ready to get into actually looking at some strips, but first we need to cover just a couple more basics, or a few more basics. First of all, let's break down each one of these waves real quick, and I mentioned the intervals and how we're going to measure them, but let's talk briefly about what's normal, or when should we be concerned. Well, first of all, P waves themselves, we know what? Represent atrial depolarization, right? And as well as atrial repolarization, both. They should be smooth, round, and upright. Okay, and it should be smooth, round, and upright. It shouldn't be real tall. Okay, if they're pointed or if they look kind of like an M, that tells us something differently. We don't have to worry about that now. But they should be smooth, round, and upright. Normal duration should be less than 100 milliseconds. Okay, and amplitude less than 2 millimeters tall. Okay, now normal duration that we're looking for in that PR interval is 0.12 to 0.20. 0.12 to 0.20. So going back to what we talked about with the big boxes, little boxes,
3 to 5 boxes.
the max should be what?
That's 5 boxes.
Yeah, 5 little boxes, right?
Yeah, 5 big boxes.
Okay. And then how many little boxes for the minimum?
3.
3. 0.04 times 3 equals 0.12. So our normal PR interval is 0.12 to 0.20. All right? QRS complexes we talked about, our QRS complexes should be less than 0.12. Typically it's 0.09, 0.08, 0.09 to 0.12 max. Okay? 0.12 should be the max on our QRS duration, and you're going to measure those. The next thing we'll talk about is the J point. Not so critical now, but when we start talking about ST elevation, we're going to utilize the J point as that point of measurement. Okay? And the J point is that point of reference where the R wave ends or the S wave ends, whatever you have. So right now, I have my R wave, and it stops right here. That point would be my J point. Now the key to recognizing STEMI, ST elevation, or depression is this J point elevated above this line right here, the TP line. Okay? That's all I want to know. Is this stuff right here, this ST segment, this J point, is it up here in comparison to this line here? And if that is the case, then I have ST elevation. If my J point is down here, is that elevation or depression? Depression. Very simple. Okay? Not rocket science. Now there's some more things that will apply to this as we move, but just recognizing that pattern is all I want you to do right now. All right. So, when we read an EKG, here's what we need to do. We need to identify the waves. The first rule to rhythm interpretation is I want to know, is it sinus? Period. Always look for the P waves. Number one thing when I look at any EKG is I'm looking for P waves. If I see the presence of P waves, and there's only one P wave to each QRS, it is sinus. Period. P wave equals sinus. Say it. P wave equals sinus. Okay? If I have a P wave, it is not junctional. Oh, that's kind of misleading. If it's a P wave, it is not ventricular. Okay? If it's a P wave and it's married to a QRS, it is sinus in nature. Okay? And I'll explain that here in a minute. Then I want to measure the PR interval. Okay? So I've got the strip, I'm looking at it. Now I want to see, I have P waves. There's one P wave in there, and it's married to a QRS complex. Now I want to measure the gap, the distance between the beginning of my P wave to the beginning of that Q wave or R wave, whichever one I have. And I want to count the little boxes. So it's between 0.12 and 0.20. All right? Then I want to measure the QRS duration. How wide's that QRS? Beginning of the Q to the end of the S, beginning of the R, whichever one I have. These examples right here.
0.12.
Max is 0.12. Okay? Then I want to determine the rhythm regularity. How regular is this thing? Is it regular? That's going boom, boom, boom. Feeling the pulse. Looking at the R waves. Nice and regular. I'll show you how we tell that. And then the last thing is, of course, measuring the heart rate. What is my rate? So based off of the presence of P waves and my rate, my regularity, I can determine what the underlying rhythm is right off. Then I want to see if there are some other things that are going to come in by having measurements that are outside of normal, which those will come. So we need to get in the habit of measuring, and then we'll go from there. All right, so here's how we do regularity. I would suggest that you go out and you buy little calipers. Okay? Where can they get calipers at? Here, I'm trying to think who would have them. Maybe an academic store, a teacher store, or something.
Any of your bookstores like that are attached?
Like electronic calipers?
No, what they are is they
Is that what you're asking for? Because you can go and get those at the hardware store.
No. So basically, they're together, and you pull them apart like this, and they're just pointed on each end, just like this. They're very pointed on each end, and you can stick
If
this
you
up.
get anywhere near UMKC or KU or, I know what, I bet you can get them online.
Oh, you can get them online, absolutely.
But as far as going to a store and getting them, it would probably be like a college bookstore maybe.
Yeah, so what it does is you can sit there and make them wider or narrower, okay?
It's a graphing tool or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah, and so what you're going to do is you're going to put it on each R wave. I can't make this big enough, but you're going to hit these two R waves, and then you're going to walk it. It should be the same distance between each R wave. All right?
I used to have some, but
I did too, and I loaned it to.
I did too.
Loaned it to a student and it's gone.
You can just use a piece of paper too.
Yeah, you can speak to that. That's the next thing I'm going to show you. So it's the same thing if you want to measure is your PR interval consistent, which will be important when we're looking at heart blocks. The same thing happens. I go to my PR, and I should be able to walk it straight out.
you can use a protractor too. You know, the little math draw circle tool? And you can get them at any of your stores.
What about
like-
those, can you use the compass?
That's, yeah, that's what I meant, the compass, not the
Okay.
protractor. The draw circle.
Yeah.
You can use a piece of paper, put it up to the R wave. I draw at the very top a dot and a dot, and I should be able to sit there and walk it between the R waves. It should be nice and regular. Okay, that's how you're going to check your regular. So when we're looking at the rhythm strips, we want to know is the rhythm regular or irregular? Okay, so you're going to get that. Now you can have some variances to where it's just a little bit off of the timing. Okay, so you can kind of give it just a little bit, but for the most part, your R wave should be nice and plottable. Okay? So that's how we do rhythm regularity. When you're looking at a cardiac monitor, how do you know that the rhythm is regular?
You know, yeah, print it off.
No, you can tell. How can you tell if it's regular?